Day 1085 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 853,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,150 losses in the past day. Then as for hardware, 9 tanks, 27 APVs, 53 artillery, plus 1 MLRS and 1 air defense system. Also noting the 121 soft vehicles. And on that note, the number of light civilian vehicles that Russians have been using on the front lines in the past month are now reported to have reached unprecedented levels. Now, it was quite the surprise earlier last year when we saw the battle trucks first emerge. Then later last year, civilian sedans and wagons in Kharkiv's east trying to make new ground. But it's starting to get a bit out of control now, with one too many examples suggesting a realignment of Russian military doctrine. While light transport has always played a small role far into the rear, it has never been seen in such large quantities as it is now, and right on the front. Specifically, the civilian vehicle of choice for the Russian army these days is the Lada Niva. Sort of a small Russian SUV. And of course, this is not anything close to a vehicle of standard military doctrine, and is really one of the softest of the soft targets out there on 4 wheels, apart from ATVs, something Russia also uses at the front. Then headed into the Ukrainian map today, and starting out in the Pokrovsk front we shall, to the southwest region of Pishana and Kotlina, where the Ukrainian Skala Battalion and other units were involved in a series of successful counterattacks. The southern hamlet of Kotlina was almost completely recaptured, and reports of Ukrainian advancements north of the area are present, with the Russian elements retreating to the mine east of the town. Then right next door, Pishana was also likely completely liberated, according to various Russian and Ukrainian reports, where in general the Russian spearhead was blunted here, where Russia is discouraged from further attacks because of the threat of encirclement and deterioration of logistics. As for an example of the Russian perspective for Pishana in particular, it has them call the situation a real mess, involving large numbers of counterattacking Ukrainians. But then headed to the edges of the Pokrovsk sector, which is perhaps where fighting is at its most fierce, because Russian forces previously secured positions on the Konstantinivka highway and continue trying to advance north of it. The Ukrainians were able to conduct a successful counterattack to its east, briefly recapturing the meat processing plant known as Ukrainian Bacon, before the Russians started fighting for it again today. And since the Russians would like to expand their foothold, coming from another inbound nearby road of attack onto the highway, then it makes a great deal of sense that the Ukrainian forces would look to keep the Russian forces at bay near this northeastern quadrant. So here, overall, the opportunities to stop the Russian advance are present, as clearly visible on the map, where it has been an ongoing weaker point for the Ukrainian defenders. Now, hypothetically, Ukraine could flip the aggressive moving Russian forces on their backs right here in no time at all, but that would involve severely attritional counter-warfare losses to their own forces. Instead, the AFU is geared toward a preservation of manpower, alongside intelligence-driven and technological warfare maneuvers. So think of it as the reverse of how the Russian army normally proceeds. Then headed across on the map to Toretsk, where it's been a grinding uphill battle, and in some ways quite literally, as was the case most recently for a Russian soldier hit by a drone drop while climbing up the Terracon on the southern front lines of the town. Now, these Terracons are a great many in numbers for the region, and also known as slag heaps, as it refers to a man-made hill or mound created from waste material produced during coal mining. It seems great in theory to climb up for a better view, but the reality of the situation has been quite different for some time, with loitering quadcopter drones very regularly running a perimeter check on. Then headed north on the map briefly to Kursk, where North Korean soldiers of the illustrious and world-class DPRK army seem to be back in dribs and drabs, with Ukrainian Special Operations Forces most recently countering these attacks. Now, oddly, and on more than just a rare occasion, the North Korean soldiers look like smiling tourists through the lens of a Ukrainian FPV drone. And you could make the comment that the North Koreans are thinking, what is this technological flying contraption? But surely by now they should have the minimal training to understand what it actually is. But with all of this North Korean smiling going on, I think my favorite was the dancing North Korean. Or at least he appeared to be dancing. Then also in Kursk, we saw a Ukrainian-operated, US-provided M60 AVLB, which is a combat engineering vehicle that deploys a mobile scissors-type bridge from its back that was on the ready, waiting for its chance to perform its most primary of tasks. With this captured event owing to the offensive operations of Ukraine's 82nd Air Assault Brigade. Then headed around the map, because somewhere in the east, the 414th Unmanned Strike Aviation Brigade, also known as Magyar's birds, showed a summary of recently destroyed Russian equipment, including another T-90M main battle tank in the Donetsk region. This is now the third T-90 MBT destroyed in 2025, which means that it accounts for a slowdown with this type of tank loss. As a contrast, there was a peak of 7 T-90s destroyed in the month of November, which is likely to be well above and beyond the replacement rate of Russia's own military-industrial capacity. Now, based on the statistics of sighted and or destroyed T-90s, you can partially deduce that Russia produces about 3 of these a month, much less than the 20 or 30 a month that they once claimed. But even when it comes to the probable 3 only per month, they're not building these $4 million units from scratch. Instead, they're slowly churning out refurbs or upgrades at a slow pace. Then, also in the east, a recent battle was seen between the opposing side's quadcopters. In this event, the Ukrainian drone spotted the Russian drone from above, then proceeding downward to the left underneath of the fresh target, then performing an impressive flip maneuver to knock out the enemy drone, and done so successfully. I'll be very sure to slow down this footage so that you can see exactly what happens here. Now, unfortunately, this action did lead to the early and untimely demise of the Ukrainian drone, but it's just as well that Ukraine is the lead FPV producer in this war, with its homegrown manufacturing of over 200,000 Frontline quadcopter FPV drones per month. That's about 2.5 million produced per annum, and all done to spec for the armed forces of Ukraine. Now, on the flip side, although we don't precisely know how many Russia produces, we do have a pretty good idea, because the big man himself, Vladimir Putin, announced ambitious plans late last year to ramp up FPV production by tenfold within a year, to reach a target of 1.4 million produced per annum. Which suggests that Russia's most recent production numbers are about 120,000 produced per annum, not per month, but again per annum, which is less than what Ukraine does in a month. Now, the remainder of Russia's available fleet, let's call it, comes from the commercially available, and by that I mean the hobbyist Chinese drones, probably from Alibaba, which are not designed to military spec, and are often purchased by their own soldiers as a means to get into the drone warfare game. The difference is night and day. Then also in the east, seen here, Ukrainian soldiers install coils of barbed wire on a new defensive line. The old Bruno wire, invented or innovated in World War I by wrapping regular barbed wire around a wooden drum to form a series of tight coils, which could then be opened and deployed much faster than linear barbed wire with poles. I've also been advised that a silver river of Bruno wire flows through a Ukrainian forest, which I'm guessing has to be the Kremenna Forest in southwest Luhansk, a location which has always been a thorn in, or a barbed wire in Russia's side. Then also on the map, well, what we see here is a Ukrainian Air Force F-16AM Fighting Falcon returning from a combat air patrol, having expended one of its AIM-120C series AMRAAM missiles, potentially used against a Russian Su-30 or 35 challenging Ukrainian airspace, but was most likely in this case, at this stage of the war, used against Russian cruise missiles or Shahed drones in a defensive shoot-down scenario. Defense comes first as Ukrainian pilots get their bearings on the new platforms, followed later by offensive air superiority engagements, better known as offensive counter-air operations. Then on the map, headed all the way to Poland, as yesterday a Russian Su-24MR reconnaissance aircraft violated Polish airspace over the Bay of Gdansk, coming from the Kaliningrad exclave region of Russia, breaching the airspace by 6.5 kilometers and lingering for over a minute and 12 seconds. The Russian side blamed the event on a navigation failure, but with Russia violating NATO airspace multiple times over the years, including that of the Baltic states, and Turkey, that was a real shiner, that one. But also Norway and the UK, not to mention all of the Russian bomber aircraft sorties bullying near Alaska, just beyond the US airspace in those examples. So for Russia to call it a navigation failure, it's simply a case of them crying wolf one too many times. And now for this incident, occurring in Polish airspace, which is NATO territory, raises serious alarms. It's a dangerous game of chicken as Russia continues to play the role of bully on the world stage. Then headed across to some news for today. We'll start out with something a little bit lighter with some Russian hardware news updates. So here we have it, another Mad Max metallic monstrosity, a Russian Frankentank equipped with another RBU-6000 anti-submarine rocket launcher. Proof Russia is sending anything they can of what's available in the old Soviet storage stockpiles and sending it direct to the front lines. Then to some real news. President Zelensky has openly addressed the idea of territorial swaps as part of ongoing discussions surrounding Ukraine-Russia peace settlements. While no official agreement has been made, the notion remains a subject of debate with various perspectives on the potential implications of territorial concessions and what indeed they'll look like. Now, also, President Donald Trump has proposed that Ukraine provide the United States with $500 billion worth of rare earth minerals as compensation for the extensive military aid the US has provided to Kyiv. He emphasized that, given the significant financial support from the US, it's reasonable to seek such compensation. Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has indicated support for this reciprocal arrangement, and Ukraine is known to hold approximately 5% of the world's total mineral resources, including many various rare earths. Now, 500 billion is quite the tidy sum, although accounting for just about 3% of the known total of Ukraine's available mineral resources, where if that deal comes along with security guarantees, then obviously it's much better to make an economic deal with the US instead of getting robbed by Russia for free. Then headed across to a couple of quick funnies to round off the day with today, guys. Now, the first one, not funny by the standard definition of the term, but is so in the way of how Russia projects its military strength. Crutches and crawling. As yet another video appeared of Russian soldiers on crutches being sent into assault in the Donetsk direction. And so, crawling, that's new. I guess now not always the bipedal infantry, but rather now the army sometimes goes quadrupedal. And you don't even have to be able to walk to stay within the Russian army SMO these days. And I know that sounds like hyperbole, but now with report after report of this being the case, and one such extreme example I'll show you in an upcoming video of a wounded Russian soldier unable to walk, but nevertheless carried straight out of a hospital and into a van headed back to the SMO. Oh, Putin and the Russian MOD, you're just the worst. Then headed across to a final funny, and the latest in modern Russian air defense. with the wording of Special Forces Air Defense literally written on the bonnet of this old rusted civilian pickup, and equipped with what was an old 14.5mm MG in the back tray that first saw action in the Korean War, the KVP. So it looks like those endless military Soviet stockpiles are turning out to be not so endless. This is far from Russia's S-400 and even S-500 days. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment, subscribe, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!